What's up, everybody? Craig Howie coming to you from the Howie Guitars Garage, and here's the video I promised about the Jimmy Page wiring setup. I'm going to go into a ton of detail, so if you don't want to get super bored and fall asleep with my teacher-like acumen here, go ahead and just scrub across on your video until you get to the part where I'm holding the guitar and you can actually hear the different sounds from the Jimmy Page wiring. But if you really want to know how it's done, what's behind it all, then go ahead and listen from here. So, first of all, you need to understand exactly what a pickup is. So a pickup is literally kind of a little antenna. What we do is we take a magnet and we wrap a bunch of wire around it to make an electromagnet, put some slugs in there that will pick up the vibration of a string, and we hook it to a jack. So let's take a look at it here. Here's an example. So basically what happens is you'll have something called a bobbin, or it'll have some slugs in it. Those are usually, sometimes they're magnetized, sometimes they're not. In a bass pickup they'll be magnetized. In this case they're probably just metal of some kind that are going to be picking up magnetism from a magnet underneath them. And then we'll come in with tiny little wire. We'll come into this bobbin and we'll wrap that wire around this literally thousands and thousands of times. The more wraps you do, the more resistance you have, the higher the output of the pup. And then finally you'll come back out and you'll have an in and an out. And then in its simplest form, you would just hook this up to a jack right here, hook that up, plug your guitar in, and this is going to create this awesome magnetic field. And then when the strings are going over top of those slugs and they vibrate, they'll send that signal right down into the jack, into your amplifier, and you're kicking some butt with some rock and roll. So that's a very simple version of what a pickup is. Now here's the problem. Like I said, this is an antenna. So it will pick up a signal from our environment, and it will cause a hum. So you'll be plugged into your amplifier and you hear the hum. And so that's why the humbucker was invented. You need to understand what a humbucker is to be able to go into the Jimmy Page wiring. So let's go from there. I'm about to explain that to you. Alright, the next thing you need to know is how a humbucker works. So we talked about why you get some hum from a single coil pickup, like I showed you right before. But now we need to talk about how a humbucker works to be able to understand how the Jimmy Page wiring works. Okay, so here we are again with our single coil. Remember, you come in here, you do thousands of windings, thousands, and you send it on out. Out she goes. By the way, if you want to see, I mean, we do tiny little windings. Tiny. Look at that. It's like a strand of a hair. Maybe you can't even see it in that camera. You use tiny little wire and you just wrap it thousands of times. Okay, so we got some hum. Now remember that this is an electromagnet. So we need to take a step back and talk about magnets really quick. So magnets have what is called polarity, however you want to say it. So they have a north and a south, just like, if you take a couple magnets and you put them one way, they're going to grab each other because they're attracting north-south, or if you put north to north or south to south, they'll repel each other. So what was figured out is we have to use the polarity of the magnets, and we have to use the direction that we wind these electromagnets to create a humbucker. So here's what they did. They came in and said, all right, we're going to put two single coils next to each other. So here they come with another one. And not exactly sure why, but somebody decided to put screws in this one and slugs in that one. I don't know. Sometimes they put screws over here, whatever. Long story short, they come in and they say, all right, well, these poles are going to be magnetized, so south is up. In other words, the south side of the magnet is going towards the strings. We're going to make these poles, they're going to be north up. So opposite. And then they come in with their other leads. By the way, I'm using Seymour Duncan colors here because they're my absolute favorite pickups. So they come in and they say, all right, since this one was wound this way, we're going to come in and we're going to wind this one this way, opposite direction. So they're wound the opposite direction, and the polarity of the magnets are going the opposite direction. Okay, so Seymour Duncan, they come in with a black lead on this one, and this one is a white lead, so obviously I have a white board. Hard to draw a white lead, so I'm just going to do dots. So that's a white lead. So now you've got two pickups right beside each other doing opposite things. This is where I reach the extent of my knowledge, and I'll get all embarrassed if I try to explain it to you. So basically they're doing the exact opposite thing, and that cancels out the hum. The electromagnetic signal coming in and picking up like an antenna on this one is out of phase with what is picking up on this one, and there you go, they cancel each other out, hum goes away. So there you go, that's how a humbucker was invented. Another thing I need to say in all this is very simple. There's a lot of grounding that's going on when you're putting your pickups in, and of course we had switches and knobs and pots and everything else. So, but there you go. Basic setup of a humbucker, something you need to understand to be able to go on and understand how the Jimmy Page wiring works. All right, so now we need to talk about all the cool things you can do with this setup with a humbucker. So here we go. Okay, we know what a pickup is, we know it's a giant electromagnet, and we know what a humbucker is. Cool dude named Seth Lover figured out to put them in different directions, different polarity, wrap them differently. Boom, we've got a canceling of the hum. Real quick to remind you, in this case, Seymour Duncan's setup, what they do is they've got the green is the start of this one, and they wind it this way, coming out. And then on this side, they've got the black is the start, coming in, boom, right there. Okay, so what are the cool things we can do with this? Well, lots of things. Oh, by the way, over here, they'll have a ground out. It's gray. I don't know, have a gray marker, but whatever, just, let's say like that. All right, 5 wires coming out. What are the cool things we can do with this? Well, these are in phase right now. That's what that means. That means, there's no hum going on. The signal coming out of this guy looks like this, and the signal coming out of this guy looks exactly the same. Kind of the same, whatever. So they're lining up, everything's good. Now, if these two guys go out of phase, what's going to happen is one of them is going to do the opposite. And then there's going to be a lot of canceling out of some of the tones, so you're going to lose a lot of your mids. Mostly you're going to have kind of the quacky highs and the lows, and it's a totally different sound, and that's one of the things that Jimmy Page wanted to do. He wanted sometimes to throw his humbuckers out of phase to get a different sound. So how do we do that? Well, one thing we could do is reverse the polarity of the magnets, but that's a giant pain in the ass, right? We can't reach into our guitar while we're playing and flip a magnet around. So one of the things we can do instead is we can reverse the direction of the current, the way it's flowing. So if this guy's flowing this way, this guy's flowing this way, if we reverse it, all of a sudden they're both flowing the same direction. If we reverse one of them, and we're out of phase, and you get that different sound. So that's one of the things you can do, is put these guys out of phase, get a different sound. Another thing you can do is called coil cutting or coil splitting. Now, it's not coil tapping. Tapping is a totally different thing, and I won't go off on that because it's a completely different thing. Coil splitting or coil cutting is where you just turn one of them off. This one's not functioning anymore. Maybe ground it out or however you set up your wiring. And so now you've just got a single coil again. Or maybe you cut this one off and leave this one on. Now you got a single coil over there. Okay, so two things we can do. We can put the humbucker out of phase, and we can coil cut or coil split. So two things we can do, two things that are going to go into the Jimmy Page wiring that I'm going to show you here in a bit. All right, now we got to talk about series and parallel. All right, now we got to talk series and parallel. Now remember back at the very beginning when we're talking about a pickup, the more windings equals the more resistance, which equals the higher the output. Because basically the more you wind that wire, the further the current has to go, the further the signal has to go, which creates more resistance, which puts out a bigger output. Okay, so when you get a humbucker, it's most likely wired in series, which means, okay, the signal's coming in, goes around, comes through, hits this one, goes right to this one, does its thing, comes out, goes on over, hooks up. So basically, the signal is, gotta do all of that, gotta do all of that, boom, out we go. That's a long way to travel. That's gonna give you a big, beefy sound because it's a lot of resistance, right? So that's how a humbucker is usually wired, and that's why it sounds a lot beefier than a single coil. Well, okay, so that's series. That's one way to do it. All right, another way we can go. I used to be a math teacher, and my kids would get so mad when I erased with my finger. That's so gross, Howie, what are you doing? So I hope some of you guys are watching right now, and I'm just gonna be like, oh, yeah, there you go. How's that? Mm-hmm, there we go. Okay, so what I just showed you was series. And what about parallel? Well, basically then what we're doing is they are running separately. It's two signal coils just going together, right? So let's go over here. There you go. So that's parallel. So now you just got smaller resistance. It's not all put together. It's not combined. It's not in series. So now they're parallel, totally different sound. Okay, so a quick review. What can we do with a humbucker? We can put it out of phase. We can coil cut or coil split. We can put it in parallel, and we can put it in series. Okay, so lots of things we can do. Now imagine you put another humbucker involved. And you start doing some things with both of them, right? Then you basically got two pickups that you can mess around with. You can put those two guys in series, or you can put those two in parallel, or you can put them out of phase with each other, or in series with, and so on. Okay, so that's what Jimmy Page wiring is about. And there you go. We're gonna go from there. All right, we're finally gonna talk about some sounds. So if you just got to this part of the video because you scrubbed past all that other boring stuff, welcome, here we go. We're gonna actually talk about the sounds that you get out of each of these guys. Okay, so what's going on here? We know that a humbucker can be put out of phase. It can be coil cut, coil split, any way you wanna say it. It can be put in series, it can be put in parallel, but then now we've got two humbuckers going on, so we can do all of those things with the two combined, not to mention that we have this switch here that's going between, setting which one you're on. So lots of combos, 21 to be exact, the way I wired it. I use Seymour Duncan wiring. Here's a picture of the wiring diagram that I made. And have I mentioned that I like Seymour Duncan? No, so I used their color coding in the diagram there. I hope I didn't make any mistakes. So if anybody's watching this and they see something, go ahead and shout out. But I would recommend going to their site and using their diagram instead of mine. I just didn't want to do any copyright infringements or anything. Mine's a little bit different because of the different setup here, and I used a couple of different routes for grounding, but obviously ground is ground in this situation. Okay, so we're going to run through all of the possibilities. So what's going on here is to be able to do all the setups between the humbuckers, what we have to do is have switches. So instead of having switches all over my guitar, what we have is push-pull pots on each of these pots here. So what's going on is you take a normal pot and you take the switch, the DP-DT switch with your 3, and they're just combining them like so. But we don't want to have to be messing with a switch, so instead of a switch, they make it a push-pull on the pot. So you come up with a pot like that guy. So it's just pushing and pulling instead of using the switch. You got your normal pot up here, and then your switch down here, all combined. 4 of them, very complex. Anyway, I digress. Here we go with the sounds. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to play through. I'm going to play the exact same lick on each sound, and I'm going to put up what setting is going on when I do that. And then finally I'm going to run them all really quickly, because I don't know about you, but I need to hear tones right after each other to be able to compare them to each other. So I'll do it quickly, smash them together. And I'm going to have to use a cheat sheet. I got a cheat sheet down here. It's crazy how many you got here. So here we go. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and I hope that helped you understand the Jimmy Page wiring that I use on my models a little bit. I'm sure I screwed up somewhere along the way. There's so many details with this stuff. But thanks a lot for watching, and we'll talk to you next time.